Hello, Clement59 here with another retrospective review for the Rush Hour trilogy. This time, it's Rush Hour 2. It's been a long time since I've watched Rush Hour 2. The movie's 15 years old, and it may have been like 6 years since I've actually sat down and watched the whole thing. So how does the movie stack up 15 years after it was released? Pretty darn good, actually. It's really funny going back and rewatching this. You know, especially like watching this after Rush Hour 1 and focusing on the story, you actually notice a lot of things. The story is still good like it was in the first one, and it's actually, but there's actually this this more balanced view, or more balanced approach when it comes to the story and the humor. Like, okay, this is the first part of the movie. This is the first thing that happens in the movie after, you know, the credits finish rolling. This is completely unedited. I'm not even joking. It goes from blowing people up to Lee and Carter singing in the car. Now, the story for Rush Hour 2 is focused on Lee and very specifically going into more detail about what happened to his father. We find out the stuff involving, you know, how his father's partner betrayed him and yada yada yada, all that stuff. I won't go into super detail on that. Now, when I said there was a balance between the story and the humor, but that doesn't mean that the story isn't still considered important. And in some ways, I actually like the story of this better than the first one. It may come from the fact that a lot of it doesn't take itself as seriously as the first movie did, but it doesn't mean it doesn't consider anything important. It actually does still have emotional moments, and it does still give Carter and Lee more serious moments. You know, especially the scene where Lee thinks Carter has been killed, and you actually see him mourning Carter. And especially since that happened after they had a big fight with each other. You know, it's actually nice to look at that and say, you know, it's still nice that we get these moments that are serious, but it doesn't take itself super duper seriously. It does have, I think it's one of the things that I think really makes this story more enjoyable than the first movie, is that it does have this bit of self-awareness underlying the story, where it says, okay, we know this is a buddy cop movie featuring Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker, so we're not going to, like, lay on the grid, because what's funny is that you actually see him mourning Carter while Carter's just kind of flopping around, going to places, trying to find the massage parlor that he left his passport at. And, you know, you see go back to Lee mourning, and he's like playing a hip hop song and honoring Carter, and then you see Carter buying a chicken. And it's so funny because there's this brilliant balance when it comes to the comedy and the story, that it's like, this is the best way to do an action comedy. You need to have a balance of, you know, the story when it comes to the lighthearted, you know, comedy. It's the stuff that makes it work the best. Now, comparing this to the show, there's actually something that I really noticed very specifically about the show that it took from Rush Hour 2. It's these terracotta, like, soldiers, because that was in the pilot, and I saw that when I first saw that, and I was like, was that from Rush Hour 2? And watching it now, I'm like, yeah, it is from Rush Hour 2. And it's something that's so more or less, you know, inconsequential as a detail. It doesn't really mean much, especially since the pilot is almost entirely self-contained from the actual rest of the series. Now, there really isn't a whole lot else in terms of the story being similar, because, you know, the first movie, you know, took place entirely in America, as does the show, especially given that the show has been building up its story there. That makes a lot of sense. If there's something that actually is related heavily to the show, it's the fact that this is much more focused on triads. The first movie did, you know, but Juntao turned out not to be an Asian guy. The show is actually focusing heavily on the Chinese, you know, triads coming into America, which is actually a really interesting plot. And it's kind of similar to this, but it's very different, honestly, and I like that. other than that, really, there's not a whole lot in terms of story comparisons that you can do between the show and Rush Hour 2, because you can tell that the show is definitely taking a lot of inspirations from Rush Hour 1. Now, talking about the humor. The humor is actually something I noticed a lot of similarities between the show and the movie. So, I actually talked a lot about how the show uses a lot of racial humor, especially, I think it was from episode 4? Yeah. It's when Lee was moving, trying to find a place, and, you know, Carter's just like, where's all your stuff? And he's like, I don't have stuff. He's like, this is America, we love stuff. And Lee's like, yes, I know, my country makes that stuff. You know, there's a lot of jokes similar to that in the show, and I was actually wondering, after I was reviewing some of the episodes, like, I remember there were some jokes like that in the movies, but is it really as prevalent as it is in the show? And yes, probably even more so. I mean, when Rush Hour 2 has jokes like,
they don't like tourists in here, so try to blend in.
You mean blend in? I'm 2 feet taller than everybody in here.
And
Yes.
What are you doing?
She said I can have any girl I want in here, man. Calm down, wait a minute.
Well, hurry up.
Hey, what's wrong with you? You don't jump in front of a black man in a buffet line. Calm down.
and also
I'm sorry, man. Oh, y'all look alike.
you start realizing that the show has done an excellent job in tackling that type of humor. The sort of racial-based humor is the stuff that the movies have always done. I mean, it does a little less in Rush Hour 1 because it's not as goofy in Rush Hour 1, and that just comes with the fact that the way they tackled the story in terms of the humor. They didn't, like I said before in my last retrospective review, they didn't really have as much humor as you would expect going back and rewatching it. There's some all kind of goofy stuff, but nothing like comedy like Rush Hour 2 does. And also, one thing that I've noticed about the show is that it actually does take its approach to the story and the humor very much from Rush Hour 2. At least from my, seeing. Because the show actually does a lot of humor and it does a lot of jokes, especially when Gerald comes in. When Gerald comes in, you can know he's going to do something stupid or he's going to say something funny. And, you know, especially when it's breaking up something that's a little more serious. Like, when there's this press meeting and stuff, and, you know, there's really no jokes you can do, you know, at that press meeting. And Gerald comes in and he's like, hey, I'm going to record you. Where'd you get that phone? I stole it? In a police department? And it's actually interesting seeing that the show does, even though it takes its more story and location base from the first movie, it actually takes its approach to comedy and story from the second movie. Because, you know, when you have a show that's going to run for, you know, numerous episodes, you can't just have a complete serious story if you want it to be comedy. And that's why they sprinkle in, they put in a lot of comedy in it. And, well, that actually works. And it's, like I said, I think it's the best approach, to me, honestly. I think it's the best approach when you're tackling this kind of genre. Because if you have, it's actually something I could talk about in the Kung Fu Panda movies, too. When a lot of times you have goofy stuff in serious fights. Like, in every single, you know, big fight with a big bad, there's always some goofy stuff happening to it, and it doesn't stay too serious for very long. And that's a lot of ways what happens with Rush Hour. There's always going to be something funny happening, no matter how serious it gets, and that really does help. It's like some really dark stuff happens, but it's basically intertwined with enough comedy and paced in the right way that it actually does come across as being very even toned, which makes the movie so much more enjoyable. The action in this movie, I have to say, from what I can remember of Rush Hour 3, this is my favorite set of action scenes in the entire franchise. And if not the best, the most memorable fight scene is in this movie, the bamboo scaffolding fight, which I forgot, going back and rewatching it, that this happened 10 minutes into the movie. One thing I love about this fight scene is that it's so interesting because it's very much dealing with verticality. Because you see these, triad people climbing up this bamboo scaffolding in China, and then, Lee, of course, chases them. But he's using he's moving around the bamboo scaffolding, and he's, using stuff that's hanging from it, like tying guys up with clotheslines, and jumping in through, rooms that are open, that have open windows, and kicking people around, and it's such an interesting fight scene, and I mean, it's just, I honestly find it to be the most memorable fight scene in the entire series. Okay, I'll say, the spa fight was also really good, or the massage parlor place. Now, comparing to, the show, the massage parlor fight is very much akin to the spa fight from episode 5. I actually did point this out when I was reviewing episode 5. It has the same sort of setup, but, it obviously doesn't have, it has 4 people instead of just Lee and Carter. In the show, you have Lee, Carter, Dee Dee, and douchebag McMustache. I can't remember his name. I don't even know if his name is said much. And, everyone kind of gets involved in on the action there. I mean, one thing, though, that the spa fight has, or the massage parlor place, and I have to specifically say it's a massage place, one thing that does so well is this goofy stuff. And this is something that Jackie Chan excels at, and he's always excelled at in his movies. It's these sort of like oddball fighting styles, and this is something throughout the entire movie, and this is something that Jackie Chan does in a lot of movies, but very especially in the Rush Hour movies, using his environment to fight, because obviously in a real fight you can't just completely kung fu everyone like in a lot of movies. Oftentimes you're going to end up being desperate and using some dirty tactics. Like, hell, in this movie, I know later in the movie when they're at the casino, he's always grabbing stuff, like throwing like poker chips, and he's grabbing like money and throwing it at people to distraction so he can run away and stuff. And it's very fun to watch those kinds of fight scenes. It's actually something that the show is kind of missing. We get a little bit of it, sadly not enough. And the spa fight does have one moment of almost desperation for Lee, which is kind of, sadly, it's a rare thing in the show to actually do. Because Lee in the movies is very much kind of frazzled in his fight scenes, as, you would be in a real fight. Because if some guy comes up to you and starts swinging a bat at you, you're not going to go, you're going to go, ah! And then, you're going to grab something, you're going to throw it at him, you're going to run away, you're going to grab a door and slam it at him and kick him. It does lend the movies to have a much more, maybe not realistic feeling, but it does feel more real than a lot of fight scenes. And though I love, some kung fu fight scenes, I love martial arts fight scenes a lot, but the fight scenes in Rush Hour mix, Jackie Chan's martial arts skills with a goofiness, desperation that he's trying to win against a bunch of people that normally you couldn't beat. And it really makes the Rush Hour stand out a lot in terms of its action and combat scenes compared to a lot of other movies. It's really something that the show, I think, would do more of. Because Lee, I think I've said he comes off more like Jet Li than he does Jackie Chan in some of the fight scenes. But, it's just mainly because he basically just kung fu's his way through everything. And he does do some goofy stuff occasionally, but in the fight scenes, he's generally fighting straight. And it doesn't feel as Jackie Chan-esque as it should. And I really think that I would like the show to, in the next several episodes, to take more inspiration from how Rush Hour the movies, especially Rush Hour 2, handled its fight scenes. And gave each fight a really unique identity when you actually think about it, because they have different lightings, they have different setups. Lee and Carter are dressed differently in each fight scene. From, the main ones that I'm thinking of are the scaffolding fight, the massage parlor fight, and then the casino fight at the end. And each one is set up very differently, and each one has a very unique, a unique identity. Now, obviously, with a show, you can't constantly have completely unique fight scenes. Now, it does do a good job with some fight scenes. Like, I remember specifically the one where where Lee was handcuffed to Gerald, so he obviously couldn't move around, so he was like using Gerald, and he gave that fight, and especially they were in like a shipyard, and it gave that fight a unique feeling. And some of the fights do that, and I do actually appreciate that the show does try to give certain fight scenes an identity. And obviously, whenever there is a fight, you can't constantly do something different, because, especially of a show that's going episode after episode after episode, you're going to run out of ideas soon enough, so sometimes you just need to have a regular fight. But overall, I really do think that the show could improve on it, and if it's be more like Rush Hour 2, because Rush Hour 2 has some fantastic fight scenes. Now, in terms of the characters, I actually did notice some interesting things. Lee's sister actually does remind me a little bit, at least in terms of her position within the triad stuff, of the Chinese lady. I don't know her name. I don't know if they said her name that when it wasn't in an unsubtitled Chinese talk. That, she's this psycho crazy lady who tries to kill Lee and Carter throughout the movie. It's funny looking back that Lee's sister actually in the show actually does have some sort of similarities to that. Obviously not in personality, I'm just talking in terms of position. Because she's still sort of taking orders from, the triad leaders, but she's very much, she very much has her own control. Though we really haven't seen as much of that in the show, I really do wish we get to see more of that. Also, one thing I have to notice is that Isabella in this movie does make me think a little bit about Dee Dee. Dee Dee, I compared to the that lady who was sort of Carter's love interest in the first movie, but also mixed a little bit with Isabella. Isabella being a Secret Service agent, and basically taking a much more, maybe not heavier role, because in Rush Hour 1 she was pretty important. But her function in it is actually much more similar to Dee Dee, and I actually kind of find that a little more interesting. It's actually a little something I would have noticed had I not gone back and watched Rush Hour 2. Obviously, there are very much differences with Dee Dee, especially considering the fact that she's playing double agent, inside the triads, but that's a whole bunch of plot details. It is interesting to see how Carter and Lee are in this movie compared to how they were in the first movie. In the first movie, we actually never really got to see their buddy-buddiness up until the end of the movie. And in this one, it starts off, like I showed you with the scene with them singing, they start off buddy-buddy. And we actually see that when, Lee thinks Carter died, he's actually, mourning him. Like, I don't know if he probably wouldn't have done that in the first movie when they first met. And it actually is kind of interesting. That's kind of where the show is actually leading the characters to. And outside of the really awkward line in the first movie of, oh yeah, like trying to portray them as like brothers or something after they met each other like an hour ago or within the day. And then they basically build it up afterwards. So we actually get, and at least in this point in the show, we're actually starting to get to that point where they are in Rush Hour 2. And I actually did like that, because the buddy-buddiness between Lee and Carter is hilarious, because it's two characters you wouldn't expect to be friends ever. And they wouldn't, had situations in Rush Hour 1 not forced them to work together. And one thing that's especially great in Rush Hour 2 is, especially in the fight scenes, you actually see them working together more. Like in, I'm talking about this in the character section because I feel like this is more relevant to that than the fight scenes. Like when you have Carter, helping Lee out from when he's getting choked, or when Lee is telling Carter to flip him so that he can get up quickly, and they're helping each other out more, and you get the fight scenes. The fight scenes are so much more interesting with that character interaction, and it's really the brotherly friendship between Lee and Carter is a core of the show, core of the movies, and it's also a core of the show, which I'm glad that they're doing that, and getting to see their relationship build up after the post pilot is actually really nice to see, and especially seeing they're bickering and stuff over a show. Overall, Rush Hour still remains my favorite of the Rush Hour movies. Now, Rush Hour, the show, doesn't pull as much from it as I really feel like it should, but it does have a few, it does pull a few things from it in terms of how the show is structured. Overall, Rush Hour 2 is, it's great. Honestly, the humor is on point. I was laughing at almost every single joke when I rewatched this. I was laughing, I was really getting into the fight scenes, and going back and rewatching it, I realized why I loved this movie so much growing up. It's so great. Rush Hour 2 is definitely the best movie in the franchise, and to be honest, it far outclasses the show itself. It's obviously bigger budget than it was in the first movie. It's got more locales. It's got bigger and better fight scenes, and it's funnier, and that's really big. It's funnier. It's from start to finish. You're going to be laughing along with, enjoying the fights and enjoying the story. So really, Rush Hour 2 is definitely my favorite and the best movie in the Rush Hour trilogy. So, that about wraps this up. Next time, I will be looking at Rush Hour 3, the finale of the Rush Hour trilogy and the newest movie in the franchise, which came out in 2007. And I'll be seeing how that stacks up against the previous two movies and the show. So, thank you for watching.